It's a Locked On crossover episode. Locked On Jayhawks, Locked On Cougs, Kansas, Houston. Is it the toilet bowl in the Big 12 for football? Is it the best game available if it were a basketball game? We're going to discuss those on today's episode of Locked On Crossover.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. He's Parker Ainsworth. You can find him at P Ainsworth512 on Twitter. Locked On Coogs there. Locked On Jayhawks here as part of this crossover episode. And thanks for making us your first listen every day. And obviously, if you are catching us either on our YouTube page or anywhere you get your podcast, thank you for doing so. On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down that Houston-Kansas football game on Saturday at 2:30. Maybe we'll get a little basketball content in here as well, and some keys to the game as well as with all of this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can get Kansas minus 5.5 or Houston plus 5.5. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So, Parker, this would be an excellent basketball game right now. I don't know about with football. I know here personally, whenever KU starts a season poorly, you get the quick comments of it's almost basketball season or it is basketball season. Late Night in the Fog is on Friday night, so it's going to feel like that for KU basketball at this point in time. What's kind of the goings on around Houston, who again is going to have a great basketball team this year, with them kind of struggling, but in a little bit of a different light than Kansas, because at least with Houston, it was maybe a little bit more expected and like, hey, this is the start of something cool with Willie Fritz.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the deal, is that Willie Fritz comes in, a lot of talent transferred out because they don't want to be here for the rebuild. So the rebuild's going to take a little bit of time. So we've gotten it's almost basketball season since about June, actually, because people just knew it was coming. And I think, that's hopefully eased some of this. We knew this was going to be a rough season. I don't think people anticipated having some of the offensive struggles necessarily, but I think that if you just told an average Houston fan in June, they'd be 2-4 right now. Like, I was kind of hoping for 3-3, but that's like the most anyone's really expecting. It's more about how it's looked at different points, but they beat TCU, found a quarterback, have a bye week, and we're hoping for better things moving forward, right? So,
yeah. And when I look at Houston, I see a team that, I don't know, with Willie Fritz, maybe this is just my bias about him. I think he's an excellent head coach. Like, I just expect Willie Fritz teams to be tough, to be physical, to be fundamentally sound. And so I feel like coming into this game, the thing with Houston is they're not going to just beat themselves to a certain standpoint. Like, Kansas has been a team that has been beating themselves. I view that to be kind of an edge for Houston. But obviously the biggest thing for them is the quarterback change of late. You put up 30 points against TCU. How much has that changed the team? Do you view that as like a big change, or was it just kind of a one-off that happened to work against TCU?
Well, it's funny you say. I think the goal is to not beat ourselves. I can hear my listeners laughing because that's the goal. It's very aspirational. No, I think the quarterback change has been huge. Donovan was a starter a year ago and started a lot of his career at Texas Tech before transferring to Houston. And he had, whether with the shoulder surgery he had in the offseason or what have you, he's regressed. He just has not been as good this year. And it's a statistical thing. It's a qualitative thing. It's all of it. Zion Chris transfers in from Louisiana, formerly Louisiana Lafayette. Fritz, I guess, recruited him out of high school. This was a chance for Zion to come play in a little bit bigger situation. I think the plan was to use Zion Chris as more of a almost wildcatty kind of package quarterback, and then as the offense kind of struggled and sputtered, it was like, no, you need to learn how to just take the reins here. TCU, they bluntly opened the week saying very clearly in the press conferences throughout the week that they'd split time, and then Zion Chris played all but one series. He just took control. He's still working on some of the passing mechanical kind of stuff. He's a very talented runner. He's doesn't look like he's moving very fast, but he clocked at over 21 miles an hour the other day in the 71-yard touchdown he had against TCU. He's an elusive guy when he's running the football. Again, we're working on the passing game stuff. I'm sure that, with him being a starter, Kansas will probably be a little more prepared than TCU was for that. But he opens up a whole different level with his legs in the offense than Donovan did.
Yeah, and that's news that Kansas fans not super excited about, because really every year since in the Lance Leipold era with their current DC, they've struggled stopping mobile quarterbacks, stopping quarterbacks scrambling. So I would expect another 100-yard rushing game like he had against TCU. That's kind of my thoughts coming in. When you look at the defense for Houston, to me, the Houston defense is, it's been a pleasant surprise. I think it's the best unit in this game. If you were stacking up both teams, offense, defense, and special teams, I think Houston is the best unit on the field. What has made that defense so good for the Cougars this year?
Honestly, it's a lot of smaller school talent transferring in that kind of followed Fritz. I guess one of the three guys I'll talk about actually was here before, but they pulled in a guy named Michael Batten from Louisiana Monroe. He'd been at like 3 or 4 schools across 7 years. He's been all over the place. Keith Cooper came with Willie Fritz from Tulane. He's a big defensive end that has a shot at the pros. And honestly, I think that coming to the Big 12 was a big deal for him to kind of boost that resume. He's a really, really good, like, you got to double team him kind of DN kind of guy. And then in the back half, AJ Halsey had the 2 picks against TCU, but he's really, more known as a hard hitting kind of safety, like more of a true 2003, I'm showing my age now, but 2003, 2004 kind of downhill, poppy in the mouth kind of safety. He transferred in from New Mexico a year ago, kid that originally grew up in Houston, was looking to get back home. And the kind of each level has multiple guys like that. Those are the 3, like, statistically most playmaking guys, right? But it's Carlos Allen from Kennesaw State. It's Ajani Carter or Juwan Gaston from junior colleges. It's guys that are getting their chance at the big time, and it just they got a few guys that panned out in the right way.
When you look at the things that Houston has maybe struggled with the most, or things that maybe have given them the most headaches early in the season matchup-wise, what would those be?
So you mentioned the defense is strong, and so like against Iowa State, it was a 3-0 ball game with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. The deal has been with the offense struggling early, the defense is on the field the whole game, and so they wear out by the end. And so you've seen, they lost that Iowa State game 20-0, and it felt worse than that because the scoring came at the end. Cincinnati was a little bit different. I travel and early in the morning on a Saturday, and I guess I could throw things off. But typically what's happened is there'll be in a 1-score game late that the defense gets beat over the top or something. I know Oklahoma got blown out last weekend, but they played Oklahoma to a 4-point game, right? It's the defense has kept it in the game. The offense has trouble scoring, really, with the exception of TCU. It's been about it.
Well, let's get to the other side of this, a little KU talk. We'll get to keys to the game, some predictions as well. Before we switch gears, though, do you have a quick note on Houston basketball? Do you think they're going to be better than they were a season ago?
Well, I think they'll also play really good defense, so that's one similarity here. I will say that weirdly feel like both of these games in football and basketball can be competitive, even if the national audience cares a lot more about the basketball game. I think that both Houston and Kansas cream the crop in the Big 12, and that I would obviously have put Houston ahead in the AP and the Big 12 polls. It's not really a slight to Kansas much. I just think Houston's got that much returning. It was an important starter, but they lost the one starter in Jamal Shed, right? And so you return 4 starters, to return most of your depth, you add a couple key freshmen, add transfer from Oklahoma, Milos Uzan. I think they're going to be okay. But obviously your Kansas folks know that they've got all the talent they brought in and all that. But I have a lot of faith in what Sampson's doing. I'll say that much.
Listen, Kansas people don't want the number 1 in the AP. It hasn't been good to them. It hasn't been good to them. The last 4 times they've done it under Bill Self, they haven't made the second weekend. And you look at Ken Palm, you look at Bart Torvik, and Houston and Iowa State are actually ranked higher than Kansas there. But all of them are top 6 teams in both those sites. So it should be really fun in the Big 12. All right, let's get to a little KU talk here after this quick break in Locked On Crossover. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I'm looking at the odds right now. Houston plus 5.5, Kansas minus 5.5. You can get Houston plus 172 money line, the over-under at 47.5. Right now, not seeing any player props up there as of yet, but typically they're putting them up as we get closer to the game. I kind of like Houston's quarterback to end up with over on the rushing yards there. You can bet on that or whatever you'd like at FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, so switching gears to the KU side, and thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks or Locked On Cougs your first listen every day. Don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. I feel like this is going to be an interesting one. So, Parker, take it away.
Well, it's interesting you use the word interesting. As a guy that's coached a lot myself, I'm actually had been a big fan of Leipold, however you want to pronounce it. I guess you probably say it better than I do. What has happened? They had these high expectations, dark horse to win the conference, and a guy that's watched every down multiple times. Can you help me and my listener? Like, what's the deal? Because it's still Jalen Daniels. It's still the same head coach. What's going on?
Oh, what isn't going on? It feels like everything that could go against them has. So right now, they're one of those teams where maybe has been a little bit unlucky. They're sitting at 1-5, and 4 of those losses are one-score games. All 5 of those, they have led in the third or fourth quarter of the game. If you take their high points of ESPN win probability, of which all of them, they have been at one point in the game, 70% or higher to win the game, you would have 1 in 10,000 odds for them to go 0-5 among the 5 games. So there has been maybe a little bit of bad luck in one-score games. Some of it, they've made their own bad luck, inability to close out games, inability to close out first halves. They right now in the final 2 minutes of the first half are being outscored 38-0. And in 5 games where you've been outscored by less than that, that's a pretty big number to go against you. And in all of them, you've had the ball in the final 4 minutes, but were unable to sustain drives, ended up giving up the ball, or maybe had a pick 6 here or there that led to an issue going the other way. So it's been the little things. It's been not being disciplined fully. It's been the new offensive coordinator in. Their previous offensive coordinator left for Penn State. He's doing big things. And Jalen Daniels hasn't looked like the same guy, whether it's just shaking off the rust continually from the injuries he's had in the past, or the new offensive coordinator not clicking. Whatever it is, there have been all sorts of issues with the passing game. Jalen hasn't looked the same. The offense hasn't been as explosive. It just hasn't really been there. And you look at the defense, like overall for the first 3 quarters of the game, outside of maybe the TCU game, the defense has been pretty good for KU. But in the fourth quarter, the defense has just fallen apart like each and every week. I mean, you give up 2 touchdowns in the last 4 minutes to lose the West Virginia game. You give up 21 points to Arizona State, including a touchdown where you allow a drive in under 2 minutes. They got the ball with a little above the 2-minute warning and ended up scoring with around 20, 30 seconds, and they only threw 1 pass the whole drive. Like, just everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. They've had some injuries here and there. It's just been kind of a nightmare season.
Well, and I don't mean to keep dwelling on the nightmare, but it's just perplexing because Kansas kind of starts what for a while there, Houston fans were thinking of like this murderer's row of a month where they got Kansas and Utah and a handful of teams. And now it's like, well, this actually is a chance to turn our own season around. Do you feel like it's something that Kansas could work out in a bye week, or are you worried about it being bigger than that?
No, I do think it is bigger than that. You look at the struggles they've had with the new offensive coordinator in there, like that's not going away. Recently, there have been some questions about the defensive coordinator and maybe being too passive with some of their coverages, and that's not going away. Like, I don't know that Jalen Daniels' struggles are going to be completely fixed. The one thing that could be helped with the bye week is injuries, but Lance Leipold said earlier this week that unfortunately the bye week didn't help them as much with the injuries as they might have hoped. And so Kobe Bryant, their all Big 12 corner, he's questionable for the game. Cornell Wheeler, who is been, I mean, JB Brown's been really good at the linebacker spot too, but right now you look at it, and the lowest ranked Power 4 linebacker among qualified snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, is the guy who is replacing Cornell Wheeler, who was the guy calling the plays for the defense and was having a good season at linebacker for KU. He's listed as doubtful for this game. So from that standpoint, not really. Now, maybe with the new offensive coordinator that extra week, I guess it can't hurt to try to sync everything together. But based on what we've kind of seen to this point in time, I don't have a ton of confidence. Now, the good news is that the last 2 years, KU did come out off the bye week really good. The first year of the Lance Leipold era, came off the bye week and had a stinker on homecoming against Texas Tech. But the last 2 years, you go back to 2 years ago, they came off the bye and beat Oklahoma State by 21 points to become bowl eligible for the first time in over a decade. And then you go back to last year, coming off the bye, they beat Oklahoma, which was, as Jason Benetti called it, a generational win for Kansas. And maybe they can have a little bit more off the bye this week. But there's a little bit of a counter to that. This game is being played at Arrowhead Stadium. Their new stadium is still under construction. And in Kansas City, it's about a 45-minute, hour drive. How many fans are really going to be in attendance for this? It's not a big ticket item. Kansas is struggling. Late night in the fog the night before. Like, there's a real chance that there's only 20,000, 15,000 people in attendance to this game in a 70,000-person stadium.
Well, and that actually segues me into what I was going to get into at some point in this segment is, do you think that's playing a bigger role than maybe a national perspective would understand, or maybe even than Kansas anticipated, because they don't get a real home game this year? It's not like it's in town. It's frankly a basketball first school, for being blunt about it. They've got good players like Mello Dotson. I would argue is a good player, and they've got talented guys. When I watch their stuff on YouTube and trying to watch some tape, but also they can't seem to put it together. Do you think that lack of a home field is playing that big of a role?
I mean, it can't help, certainly. The weird thing, like, they've always stayed in hotels in the Kansas City area, even when they are at home, just to, avoid the happenings of downtown Lawrence and everything like that, all the partying and trying to get into whatever. So, that's not different. They're still staying there. It's possible that there is a bit of a home crowd environment thing, but the only other Arrowhead game they've played so far, the TCU game, I think it was listed at 47,000, which normally Memorial Stadium held around 48, 50,000. So, I mean, it's possible. It's possible that, it's led to a few things here or there, not feeling like you have a home, maybe somewhere mentally it does matter. But you are right. There is still a lot of talent on this team. And I think that is both what is still giving fans some hope that, hey, maybe you could turn this around, and not that they're going to reach their goals from the preseason, but maybe you could turn this around and get a couple wins over the back half and look more competitive and feel better about where the team is going into next year. But at the same point in time, that's why it's been more frustrating for everybody. The fact that, a lot of Kansas fans have seen a lot of bad football over the years, but you almost expected it, or you knew you didn't have as much talent as the other team. Now, that's not really the case. Yeah, sure, maybe TCU is more talented than them, or some of these teams have a little bit more talent at one position or another. But overall, I don't know that there's any team they've played so far where you just sat there and went, yeah, that team's way more talented than them. And so I think that's what's made this even more frustrating for KU fans.
The spread has shrunk, but Kansas has been a favorite all week. To my surprise, if I'm being really honest. What's the Kansas path to victory here? What do they got to do?
Well, when you look at it, it's going to be tough because this has been a running football team, or at least they're best when they run the football. Sometimes Jeff Grimes forgets that. But the problem in this game is that Houston, as you can attest to, has been pretty good against the run so far this season. And so if they make Kansas a pass-first team, what does that look like? And do you actually have to be a pass-first team in this game to win? And then at that point, you're relying on things that haven't worked out for you so far. Then on the defensive side of the football, you've struggled stopping scrambling quarterbacks. So I think it starts right there. What does the bye week do for you? Does it give you more time to scheme up a better defense for stopping a scrambling quarterback? Offensively, are you just a little bit more in rhythm? Jalen Daniels, at the very least, probably had his best game of the season last game against Arizona State. There were still some, plays here or there that I'm sure he'd like to have back. But it was his best performance of the season. So if Jalen looks like the guy, and I've been saying this every week, so it's at some point it's a broken record. If he looks like the guy we saw from a couple years ago, then I feel good about where this game is going to be for KU. Or if the defense looks like it has in the first 3 quarters of a lot of games for the full 4 quarters of the game, then I feel pretty good about this. But unfortunately, it has been such a rinse and repeat thing for KU so far that, I certainly would not feel comfortable laying 5.5 points right now.
Well, I want to talk about what you would feel comfortable laying down in a second, but we got to talk about one new buddy we got here at Locked On Sports first. So without further ado, I got to tell you, we're talking about two teams that need a boost, need help performing. They got a lot of things they could really use a little bit extra. And if you ever need that boost or need a little bit extra yourself, it's time to stop worrying about that and get HIMSHims, so you can feel confident knowing you can get hard and stay hard whenever you're in the mood you need help performing. HIMSHims is changing men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from comfort of your couch. No insurance is needed. Just one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. The process is 100% online. There's no need for uncomfortable doctor visits or anything like that. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMSHims can help you find the option that works best for you. Start your free visit online today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products that are not approved by verified or safety for effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies on product and subscription plan. All right, we're back here with a crossover episode. Locked on Cougs, Locked on Jayhawks. Contrary to popular belief, we're talking football. And Derek, you mentioned that there's bye week things here to be fixed, and there is a path to victory. You said you're not going to be laying down 5.5 points. I guess I want to actually backtrack a sec before we get to like predictive measures or whatever else you want to take this, wherever else you want to take this. Were you surprised to see Kansas was a favorite after being 1-5 for the first half of the season?
I wasn't totally surprised that they were a favorite. I was surprised by how many points, because it's 5.5 now, but that thing opened, I want to say it was 8.5. It might have been 7.5. And it's worked its way down slowly. I thought that if they would have been favored by 1.5, 2.5 points, like that wouldn't have surprised me at the end of the day, because, even though Houston did kind of dominate TCU, and TCU was kind of the team who beat Kansas the easiest, I guess would be the easiest way of putting that. This league in the Big 12 is just so back and forth. And so Kansas is the home team. Like, they've had a lot of close losses. Like, I can understand why they're favored, but I look at this game and I look, like I said, Houston has the best unit on the field with the defense. I think, I don't know, not that Willie Fritz isn't going to be motivated for a football game, but like, he wanted this job. When Lance Leipold got the job, he wanted this job. And they passed him up to get Lance Leipold, and it had been working out until this year, to say the least. But I think Willie Fritz has some ties to the Kansas City area. Like, this probably means a little bit extra to him to try to come in and perform. You look at the matchup struggle for KU, stopping a running quarterback. I think there's a lot to like Houston in this game. So I think for Kansas, you have to kind of, I can't even say win the turnover battle, because they did that the last 2 weeks, and you lost both games, unfortunately, the last 2 games that they played. But yeah, I think this comes down to like, how consistently can you pass the football? Can you avoid turning the ball over yourself? And can you just not beat yourself? Because Kansas has too often beat themselves this season. Can you just play a clean football game for once?
Yeah, I would stress too. You mentioned this is a big game for Willie Fritz. He's from Shawnee Mission, Kansas. He went to Pittsburgh State. He coached a handful of different places, including like Central Missouri along his path, like very familiar with that region. And then this like Bayou region are kind of his two necks of the woods. Right. And so he's said, that this week they've got like a lot of tickets with Fritz names on them from family and stuff like that. He's openly admitted that several of them will be wearing royal blue because that's who they grew up rooting for. Like, he understands what he's walking into here. I think he wants to walk away with the win as much as anyone. I mentioned how big a deal this is for Fritz. How big a deal would this one be for Leipold? Because I don't think he expected to be in this position.
No, not at all. And it's tough because at this point in time, like, you look at KU's schedule over the back 6, still have to play at Kansas State, still have to play Iowa State, who looks really good, still have to play at BYU, who looks really good, still have to play Colorado, who, looks like a very solid team at this point in time. It seems unlikely that you're going to be pining for bowl eligibility. At this point, it's just trying to avoid hitting, rock bottom again, trying to avoid bottoming out. And I think you look at it like, I think there's a chance whoever loses this game, in fact, I feel like this is probably going to be the case. Whoever loses this game is going to be being talked about as maybe the worst team in the Big 12 this upcoming season. I guess for Houston, because they have the TCU win, like they'll have a chance to kind of bounce back from that. But it's certainly, if Kansas loses, they will be viewed as the worst team in the Big 12. And you cannot reset to where you were a couple of years ago. Like if you're going to have a down year, you're going to have a bad year, make it 3-9, make it 4-8. Don't go 1-11, don't go 2-10. And at the end of the day, this is KU's best chance remaining of a win. It's either this one or at Baylor, but that one's on the road to finish the season on their senior day. So this is very important for, recruiting, for the momentum of the program, for just getting some positivity again. And as we turn closer to basketball season, keeping the fan interest.
It's a big deal, and I think both fan bases see this as an opportunity, right? And bluntly, Houston can kind of feel like there's some momentum here. You mentioned that they beat TCU a couple weeks ago. Kansas looks like a team that is beatable because a lot of people have so far, if we're being honest. And then next week, Houston gets Utah. I don't mean to look ahead, but I'm not playing in the game, so I feel like I can do it a little bit differently than they could, right? Like Utah's sputtering. Like suddenly you look at Houston's schedule, it's like, okay, that gargantuan middle of the schedule is not so bad. I guess I gotta ask. You mentioned that Kansas really wants to win this game for a bunch of reasons. How surprised would you be though if Houston pulls it off? I mean, it's not the betting odds, it's not the whatever, but I think it's going to happen. That's what I've been talking to my listeners about all week. As long as Houston comes out ready to play, would it shock you if that happened?
No, not one bit. Because if you've watched this season for KU, you would not be shocked at all. And there is a level of, every week has pretty much ended the same. It's like, oh, KU has a bad play at the end of the first half. They give up a touchdown. They don't score. And then in the fourth quarter, the defense falls apart and they can't make some key plays on offense. And they end up losing the game. And it's been the exact same every single time. So if you told me that's exactly how it went too, that would also not surprise me, even though it would be infuriating for every KU fan.
I guess I don't mean to laugh too hard, but there is some humor in that it's the same wash, rinse, repeat kind of cycle. I guess, is there any lingering things that a Kansas guy needs to know about the Houston team before they get ready for the weekend?
Yeah, I guess what is the way that you think Houston doesn't win this game, and how do you think Houston does win this game? Is it just they just play a clean game and versus what happens if they don't?
Yeah, I think the big deal is that I think, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, you catch Kansas wouldn't be caught off guard by Zia and Chris coming in to play the game. He threw the ball okay against TCU, anything spectacular. But I think the big deal there was that he actually lined up to throw the football. And he had a touchdown pass in the first drive and stuff like that. If that were more of a flash in the pan, that's a problem. One-dimensional team, I don't think, does very well against Leipold. I also would think that ultimately, like you mentioned, Zion Chris is a really good runner. Kansas has been trying to figure that out all year. If they finally figured it out with the bye week or whatever, can't win if you can't score. Houston has seen that up close and personally. Literally been shut out twice this season already. And against UNLV, they didn't score till the very end of the game. And so I think that's the big deal here is if the offensive output we saw against TCU was really kind of more of the one-off and not a sign of progress, then Houston might have some real problems in the back half of the season. And that's going to frankly kind of steer the conversation about how do we build on those.
Well, he's Parker Ainsworth. You can give him a follow at PAinsworth512. I'm Derek Johnson at D Johnson Radio. You can find Locked On Cougs. You can find Locked On Jayhawks. This has been our Locked On crossover episode. Good luck on Saturday, and hope some Houston fans, if anybody comes up, enjoy some Kansas City barbecue. Any last words?
We had to have a whole separate podcast about the barbecue differences here. We got basketball and barbecue. We're sitting here talking about two bad football teams.
That's right. Yeah. Another separate episode, happier episode. That one to be on the lookout for. Parker, thanks, man.
Take care.